Welcome to an episode of Overthinkers Society. We have our first ever guest, Damian Taylor. Thank you, Damian, for coming.
It's a joy.
For agreeing. Like, just to give a little context to how this came about is, like, I've actually been having a lot of anxiety just talking to myself and trying to make sense out of it. I've tried every way possible, just, like, trying to... I've actually drawn, like, faces on a Post-it note and, like, posted it on my laptop screen just to have, like... just to see if it could be like a simulation of talking to a real person. I've tried like writing a journal. I've tried like talking to my own like past self. None of it helped. None of it helped to replicate what it actually feels like to talk to a real person. So thank you for coming to keep me company today. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Oh goodness, yeah, we're all a bit out of practice from actually talking to people, I think, in real time at the moment.
Oh yeah.
Do you spend? I've seen a lot of your videos. Do you spend most of your time in your room?
Yeah, 99.9% basically.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been living like a hermit the last year basically.
Okay.
And I'm sure you can agree. I'm sure you can agree that like us producers, it's just the way our lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, you spend most of your time on your own, clicking on buttons, staring at a screen. You know, it's funny because I get to work with a lot of other artists, but so much of that work now is remote as well, even pre-COVID.
Nice.
So,
nice.
You know, we spend some time together, and then, you know, there's big phases of time where when I was a lot younger, you'd all be in like a big studio because you'd have to be in a big studio and everyone would be there together. And now it's like you have the phase of the project where it's like I take it away and I do all the clicky stuff so everyone else doesn't have to sit there and be really bored, you know?
Is it quite different working remotely and working in the studio with everybody real time?
I mean, the simple answer is yes, but it's a little bit more like you batch together all the bits, all the stuff where you'd normally be working for a couple of hours in a room and everyone else would be off playing pool or off at the shop, and then they'd come back and you'd talk about stuff. It's almost like you put all the stuff that people would do together into one little parcel, and then all the stuff that I would do alone into another little parcel. So it's interesting more in terms of how you have to approach it now, thinking about like recording as much stuff as possible and then knowing that you'll have this separate time to sort stuff out, as opposed to, you know, everyone being okay to hang around for a few hours while you're sorting stuff out. Does that make sense? Because it used to be like when I was starting, computers weren't really powerful enough for us to make good records in our homes.
Yeah, for sure.
So like you'd have a studio for 2, 3, 4 days for one song. And so that would all be in the natural rhythm of it all, whereas now it tends to be a bit more like you have a day to record. So you just go crazy and record. And then it's like you kind of almost come back home with a massive pile of like dirty laundry that you have to wash and sort through and then fold. And then that's how you turn it into a song.
But it does, in a way, though, it does sound a bit more efficient and for me, I don't really have any personal experience working in the studio because obviously I've just been making music here alone in my room. But I don't think I would ever, like, I kind of want to stick to bedroom for the longest as possible because I quite like having,
Sorry, I was going to say there's something really nice about being able to think about it in a different way when you're not just kind of clock watching. Do you know what I mean? It's like on one half, the kind of pressure of the time makes you all make decisions. But then on the other half, it's like sometimes what you really need to do is just like go for a walk or do something else.
Yeah,
for
for
hours,
sure.
You know?
I have a really short attention span as well. So I would just like, and I would just sweat a lot when I'm recording. So I need a break to like dry the sweat when I'm recording. So yeah, I need a break. And
right.
I heard that studio time's super expensive as well. So I would feel very precious about my time if I were to record in a studio than in my room.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm really interested to know actually, like, what's your whole process around making tracks? Like, you know, your songs seem like so led by like the idea or the concept and the lyrics and stuff. Is that so? Do you tend to start with like a lyrical idea, or are you like you mess around making music and then at some point, you know, lyrics and the kind of idea of what it's about happens, or are you making beats all the time and then some of them turn into tracks, or how does that work for you?
It's a mess. It's all over the place. It's just like it's never really there's never really like one way to do it and just the way I go about it, which is kind of a surprise because I've always thought that I'm like this kind of like set way. Oh, I need this to be like this way, and this is the only way that I can ever do it. But it seems like when it comes to music, at the very least, it's quite kind of free formed, and I just kind of go with the flow. When it, if I have like an idea for like a lyric for a chorus, I would just like write the whole song out without any instrumentals or like any chords whatsoever, just humming in my head. And then I would go into production, like start from like a basic chord production with some pianos or something, and then just kind of add fleshes, if you will, with like little ding dongs and like little bells and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I would just kind of, I don't really feel like writing today. I don't feel like, like fishing for rhymes or fishing for words or fishing for even like topics to write the song about. So I would just make beats and sounds for the sake of making sounds, and then kind of have that sitting in my folders for a while. And then I would, if I feel like it later on, I would revisit it and write a song to that. So I think it's quite fluid. The way
Nice.
I approach it.
Yeah, that sounds great. And did you like start on an instrument, or were you like straight in on laptops and then learn instruments after that?
I mean, I wouldn't call it an instrument because it's like 90% of like the way I produce is like just my MIDI keyboard. So it's just like so there was, I don't think it was quite straightforward to learn it. It was just kind of like just pressing buttons for me. And so far it's worked out fine, but I would love to. Like, I would love to know what these supercomputer vibe thing going on behind.
You know what's funny about all this is the reason I have all this is because I have no idea what it does.
It just looks cool.
Do you want to go like, what happens now? I don't know,
I actually, you know how they have like YouTube adverts like before you play a video, and there's always, for me, for some reason, when I play any YouTube videos, there's always an ad for Masterclass.
Oh, right.
And there's always one that's playing from I think it's Skrillex or Deadmau5, but he has one of those as well. Like he has one of those like supercomputer things, and he's just like tweaking the knobs, and it just looks so much fun.
It's definitely fun, and I think it's a really nice kind of change from pressing buttons, if you know what I mean, computer buttons. Like I really, really love computer buttons. And yeah, you can really get lost in there, and it's like it's quite unpredictable, shall we say.
Okay.
So it's like you plug stuff in and you never quite know what's going to happen. So it's actually really nice when you're working on your own that you have all these kind of random things that take on a little bit of a life of their own. And then it's also, it's fun, like almost like, I'm good at this one. I'm good at Sudoku. Like if I practice lots and lots of Sudoku. But you have to like, it's like with Sudoku, you have to kind of try to remember like, oh, there's a 9 up there and there's a 4 down here, and this is a little bit like that. It's like, well, if I plug this into a VCA, where's the kind of envelope coming from, and then where's my oscillator coming from? But then I'm going to route this oscillator through that other thing to cross modulate the other oscillator. So you have to, it's like quite an intense kind of concentration practice as well.
What's an oscillator? It sounds familiar, rings a bell, but I don't know what it does.
An oscillator oscillates, like goes back and forth. So basically it's a thing that generates a sound. So in synthesizers, oscillators are what make the original wave form, like they make the sound wave, and then it goes through other parts of the synthesizer that shape that sound. So if you think about like with your voice, your oscillator is your actual vocal cords. That's where there's a little thing in there going back and forth. Yeah. And then when it comes up through your mouth, then your mouth shape is kind of like filters.
Oh, okay. That analogy makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have the thing that generates the sound, and then like, the shape of our heads make it resonate a different way. Yeah. So that's why everyone's voice sounds a little bit different.
That's cool.
So just the same with synths, you have the thing that makes the original waveform. And then, when stuff goes like boom, wow, and that kind of thing, the wow bit is a different part of the synthesizer.
I see.
Yeah. So this basically, it's just like a whole bunch of different things that generate sounds, and then a whole bunch of things that change the sound, and a whole bunch of things that can tell the things that change the sound how to change.
I'm just observing, like, because it's like flickering as well right now. Are they on?
Oh, yeah.
Are they
should
on?
we zoom in? Yes.
That's so cool.
So yeah, I mean, it's also when you get to the point of your career that you get one of these, it's a little bit like guys who work at banks buying a sports car.
Right.
When they're a bit too old, it's kind of like your producer midlife crisis is when you get a modular synthesizer.
So is it kind of like the Ferrari of producers?
Oh no, it's a little bit more like, well, you're just searching for meaning in your life, so you think you might as well get this ridiculously complex thing to try to compensate for some kind of internal deficiency.
So that's kind of like the materialization of midlife crisis of a producer, basically.
Kind of thing, yeah. But lots of guys get it in their 20s as well. So
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
But it does sound great and it's fun and it's just a nice change. But honestly, I'll go months without using it, depending on kind of what project I'm on and what type of work I'm doing with people.
Is that like when you're sleeping as well, or do you have to like turn it on every morning?
I switch it off and on, yeah.
Oh, right,
so
okay.
I tend to, yeah. It's funny because I'm in quite a small room here in LA and the air conditioner isn't that powerful. So when it's 40 degrees Celsius, you have to make sure you keep as much equipment switched off as possible.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole other bunch of stuff over there and, kind of wraparound gear.
Would you, is there a possibility that it uses up too much electricity to a point where it just like, I don't know, it could just cause like a whole
Global
house.
Warming, or?
Well,
it's like Greta Thunberg's going to come in and say, switch off your modular synthesizer.
I wasn't gonna go that big of a scale, but I was actually just gonna say if it's gonna ever cause what's that, like power off situation.
Oh, right. Yeah.
A power cut.
The things that will do that are like your subwoofers and your loudspeakers, basically.
Oh, right.
But yeah, it's, it blows a lot of fuses itself, but they're tiny, tiny little fuses.
Okay.
But it hasn't like switched off the whole house or anything.
So do you not ever like get like bombed with this like mammoth electricity bill like every month by using it?
Maybe. It could be that I use it all the time, so I don't know what a normal electricity bill would be like. Do you know what I mean?
Oh
It's
my
like
God.
my thresholds are all a bit funny. So
is it like a significant amount for you ever? Like were you
it's hundreds of dollars.
Really? I get like
Yeah.
$3 of electricity bill every month. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. So I don't know if that's just like being in LA and that's what power costs here,
maybe
or if
it's
it's just my
different.
if it's just my studio. But this one room does it uses a fair bit of power. So then when you get into like bigger speakers and everything as well,
Hundreds of dollars.
you-
Oh my gosh.
you got to
that
be
is-
careful. That's for the whole house, it's not just like for the studio.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough.
But-
Because
But still,
yeah, because it's just like the electricity that I use is just in my room, and I don't have an
Right.
AC. I just have a fan
yeah.
and my laptop.
Are you in Seoul or
Yeah.
whereabouts are you?
in Seoul,
How's
Korea?
the vibe?
It's pretty chill.
Yeah.
It's pretty chill. Like I just go out every once in a while to get some fresh air. Good food. There's
Oh my
lots
God.
of good food.
Do you know what? I actually internet ordered some Korean pancake mix, which arrived
yeah.
yesterday.
So good. It's really good. Yeah.
And
Korean
I
food.
internet ordered some gochujang, so I'm gonna try making like
Nice.
shrimp pancakes.
You're like
Yeah.
pro. If you're into gochujang, that's like pro. That's like it means you're cooking it.
I'm building up to things. Yeah, it's weird. It's like there's been these mad Korean karmas in my life, like building up over the last year or something like that. Like my daughter is 13 now, and she's obsessed with Korean music.
Really, like K-pop.
So like, yeah, oh yeah, big time. So when I told her like, oh, my management have started working with a girl called Suli who's in Korea, she's like, oh my God. She's like, which group is she in?
Oh, I hope she's not like too disappointed if she finds out like just the way.
I'm sure it'll be reassuring to know that there's more people than just K-pop musicians in Korea.
Yeah.
Does
Is she into like BTS then? Like BTS?
She's not so into BTS. She's really into Stray Kids.
Right.
She's a total. What are they called? I'd almost want to say they're called Australians, if you know what I mean. But they're not. Whatever. Stray Kids are her main band. She really likes Blackpink.
Oh yeah.
ATs. She tells me so much about every single band that I forget a lot.
There's a
'cause
lot. There's a lot
of
Korean
bands with a lot of members, yeah. But we actually, I don't know if Colin told you, but I've been streaming on Twitch during lockdown, so I stream 3 times a week from the studio. And there's a really, really nice guy who's a young producer from Seoul who started hanging out on my Twitch as well. So we've been talking, and he's like being mentored by someone who works on some of the records over there. So, you know, we're kind of, I've asked my daughter to start telling me like, okay, which are the exact Korean artists? And we've had like times where we sit down for an hour and like go through everyone on YouTube and try and figure out who would be cool to work with and all that kind of stuff.
That's cool. Would you ever want to work with a K-pop artist then?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm really lucky in that I've traveled so much doing what I do. And for me, one of the biggest thrills of what I do is just learning about different people and working in different ways. And also just like traveling the world and making music with people. Like I'm originally Canadian, then I lived in New Zealand for 10 years and my parents were British. Then I came up in recording studios in the UK. Oh. Then I lived in a couple of cities in Canada again. And now I'm in LA. And I've been very lucky that I've pretty much got to travel the whole world between like touring and record production. So I was actually in Seoul in 2008 and we played a show at the Olympic Gymnastic Arena.
That's massive. That place is massive, I think. Was it was it with Björk or was it with...
Yeah, it was with Björk,
okay.
yeah.
Okay,
so, I mean, and working with her was incredible because she really turned music into a whole adventure. So I was like, oh, let's go to Jamaica. Oh, let's go to Puerto Rico. Oh, let's go to, you know, well, anywhere, basically.
Yeah.
Lots of time in Iceland. And then, when I played with her band, we just got to see the whole world doing that as well.
That's so exciting.
So, but I feel like I haven't spent as much time in like your part of the world as I'd like to. And I think there's so much interesting stuff going on over there.
The Asian kind of territories, you mean?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Oh, I can't imagine what it would be like to like travel for musical purposes, you know? Like I've only traveled for traveling purposes, like to eat, to eat and go like see stuff. But like I can't imagine what it would be like to like visit a whole new country, to work with an artist or a musician or producer or an engineer in that territory to work on music. That would be like, I'm still kind of experimenting with it, with collaborations, but just the thought of it, it's exciting, I think.
It really is, because I think when you're doing something creative as well, it's like everything is new and exciting.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And your sessions take on like a whole new energy, and all your perspectives are different, and all your kind of creative habits become different as well.
Yeah.
Because you're not just living like your normal life. And you know, if you're working with nice people who like show you around, like when I was working with Björk, we got to go to Mali as well in Africa and work with Tumani Diabate, which was incredible. Then I produced some other stuff for a Brazilian artist. So, you know, she flew me down to Sao Paulo and kind of, you know, got to hang out down there.
Nice.
I was doing some stuff in Australia last year, you know, then still do quite a lot of stuff in different parts of the States and Canada and the UK. But yeah, it feels like, you know, Korea, Asia as a whole, and like Europe. I haven't done as much Europe as I'd like, to be honest. I've kind of visited places, but haven't done like, you know, 2 months in Berlin or anything like that.
Yeah. When you like go to another country to work with another artist, do you work in their homes or like in a studio then? Like in a studio?
It's really, it's kind of whatever the situation is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if people have a good home studio, then we'll do that. Often we'll do stuff where we might do like pre-production in an apartment and then go into a bigger studio to record. When I was working with Björk, she very much like you likes kind of the bedroom recording lifestyle, but she would just travel and set up in whichever rooms and whichever houses, you know, she would kind of work in. So that was a kind of a combination of the travel thing, but we did very, very few sessions in proper studios. But, you know, that's also part of the fun as well, is, you know, just like getting to know the whole like studio staff and different cultures. And when you kind of done the nerdier side of, because I came up through programming and engineering and then kind of moved into production more in like the old fashioned sense of the word.
Yeah.
So just like landing in a studio where you don't know how anything works and trying to figure out how to get like the best out of it. and how you're going to work with the staff. And often you turn up places where on the website it says they have this stuff, and then you get there
It's not
and
there.
they don't have it. Yeah. But that's all kind of fun as well. But I've moved a lot away from wanting to be like pressing all the buttons on like the big consoles. Like if I'm going somewhere to work with someone, I try to work with engineers and kind of local staff who know the room, so I can focus more on like
The
having
craft of
interesting
it.
conversations
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the artist. Yeah, and well, a lot of it is like I find it the most interesting thing now is actually talking to the artist and seeing what they're trying to do, and you can devote 100% of your attention just to like really understanding the artist's wavelength and figuring out how you're going to work through creative situations and make things. And when you're kind of spending half your time like trying to figure out where the cable goes or why that microphone isn't working, then that takes up like half of your brain.
Yeah.
So
that definitely takes a lot of brain capacity. And for me, like in that situation, I would break. I would be like, frick this, I'm getting out of here.
Yeah.
I would not. I don't really cope with that kind of pressure very well. That's why I was going to ask you actually, like,
okay.
I think one of the biggest kind of concerns, I wouldn't say that I'm like massively concerned about it, but one of the things that always gets in my mind when it comes to collaborating is that I feel like there's like an extra layer of pressure on me when there's somebody else in the picture. You know, I feel like maybe this is just kind of my artist side of things, but because songwriting and production, it's like really hand in hand and therefore so personal, I feel like when there's somebody else, it kind of dilutes the way I think about songwriting almost.
Mm-hmm.
And so for you, like as a producer, does it ever like, is it, cause cause you don't ever like work on your own on a song from start to finish, right?
Rarely, let's say. But pretty much like 100% of my time is getting results with and for other people.
Yeah.
Kind of trying to get the most out of an artist. I've had like Damian Taylor remixes where it's like my take on stuff, and I have like put out the occasional like 2 singles. And actually that on Twitch I've started doing a lot more of just like making stuff, but I've also thrown the door open to like anyone who's on the stream can send me a sound or a part and I'll kind of incorporate it. So that's wound up being really fun as a collaborative thing. But can I suggest a couple of ways for you to think about that?
Oh yeah, please do.
Because I totally want to acknowledge like what you're saying. There is something really special about an artist who's doing everything entirely themselves.
Yeah.
And that's, if you think about it as like that's kind of one presentation, or that's one universe, or that's one type of meal. And then a collaboration, like if you can really approach it as like, okay, we're going to make this entirely different thing.
Right, so like completely different genre from what I'm kind of doing alone.
Yeah, or just like let it be its own entity.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like if you have dinner with a friend, it's different to eating on your own. Like if you're eating on your own, you can kind of like look at your phone and watch a movie. But if you're eating with a friend, the conversation is kind of the point. I guess the difference is if you're collaborating with someone on like a Suli record, then you need to feel confident and comfortable that your collaborator understands that they're there to serve your vision.
Yes.
So that's a real balance in terms of, and it's actually something that I'm always trying to find the line with the artists I work with in terms of like, how much do I say? Some people just want you to like throw everything in there. They're totally open to everything. And other people, you can kind of overwhelm them if you come in and say like, your music's supposed to sound like this. And I tend to work really well with artists who are quite unique. And as a kind of character, I'm not like a my way or the highway kind of producer. Like when I was coming up as a programmer and engineer and just other producers I know, they're like, I want it to sound like this. You know, it's like, I'm the boss, I'm the producer, and I don't see my role as being like that.
Yeah,
my role is like, it's also like I have so many different kind of skills and things that I can bring to the table for an artist. So it's much more fun for me to like talk to them and try and engage them in ways that we can explore their music, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, most of my favorite records that I've produced have been like a really, really close collaboration with the artist. and it's much more about me just like kind of extending the artist's reach.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to put the artist in a box.
I think it's I think that's the way to do it. I guess I think it's yeah.
But you know, you might say like there might be another producer or something like that out there, and you really like their style. Like the flip side for me is like I do so many different kinds of music, but whereas if you think about like, you know, say a hip hop producer like Timbaland would be a great example. It's like you go to someone like Timbaland because they make that kind of beat and you want to be on that kind of beat.
Right. So
do you know what I mean?
What would you say your role would be when you are in that kind of situation? Is it kind of like adding a bit of your splash to it, or kind of like just enhancing the sonics of it, or is it kind of like...
Well, I really like to get really deep into what the artist is trying to communicate. Like when I was a lot younger, it used to be like, yo, check out all my crazy fills and I'm going to make all the sounds go whoosh. Do you know what I mean? And it was almost a bit of like, I felt like I had to prove myself.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to say this as a fact. It kind of sounds really arrogant, but I've made like basically like the most avant-garde records of my generation.
Yeah.
And I've also made like the heaviest records of my generation, and I've made like the deepest records of my generation. So I don't have anything to prove. And at this point, what I'm really interested in is like what's going to serve the artist's world. So on a really practical sense, like if we were talking about us working together, the first thing I would ask you is just like, how do you feel about your music? Which bits are you happy with, and which bits do you feel like you wish you could kind of access? And if you're like, oh, Damian, you know, I really just wish that it had like big, beautiful orchestras all over everything, then, you know, we'd find like the right arranger to go and work with. And, you know, we'd look at the way of like, okay, which songs are going to work here? And we'd list, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it'd be very much like a conceptual thing, which we would then turn into like a tangible plan of how to get a complete record at the end of it. And then the flip side of that is I'd also like ask you about like, you know, I'd make notes, listen to your songs and say like, hey, this point here, I'm not too sure what you're talking about. Or at this point, I'm getting a little bit bored. Or at this point, I just love this point so much, but it only happens like once. Can we bring that back? So there's, you know, but that's all kind of done in collaboration with the artist. And then there's other artists I work with, like there's an Australian girl called Odette who's absolutely brilliant. And I really just try to... it's really like I just make my skills available for her. So it's almost like I'm her producer, but she produces me producing her.
Yes.
In other words, like I have like, you know, I can press all the buttons, I can plug in all the cables and stuff like that. But so much of what I do is like, oh, is this the kind of vibe? Is this the vibe? And she's like, yes, no, more like that, but more. Do you know what I mean? So I really like it if the artist can direct me. It's not just like I'm kind of the boss telling someone how things should work.
I think there is
basically.
like, it's kind of like, it's almost kind of like there are like two main ways of collaborating. One is kind of like the way you said, how it's treated completely differently from like a solo thing where it's like you're producing and singing, recording, engineering, everything from start to finish. And collaboration is just purely just collaboration, and it could just have a completely different nuance from some of the things that you work on your own. And another collaboration would be kind of like a solo project where you have something of a vision, but you need help from a pro like you to kind of just really enhance things. And like I've had so many times when I would produce a track and I'd be like, God, I really wish I could have like this kind of sound, and it just like I try to do it the best I can, it just ends up sounding like fart. You know, it's like, you know, it's like no matter how much I try, I can't seem to find a way. And there's only so much tutorials out there to like direct you to make a certain kind of way of sound of, you know, it's kind of like, it's almost hard to like, it's impossible to Google as well. Like, it's like, how do I make this sound? But I don't know how to describe that sound, you know?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. And I mean, the other reality as well is, you know, congratulations, by the way, on just hitting 100,000 subscribers.
Thank you.
I was really amazed to see that. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
But, you know, it's like you're at this interesting point now as well where more people are hearing your stuff, your ambitions are probably growing. You're like, as well as music, I'm also, I have a few new videos I want to do. I want to get my merch out. I want to plan this, so you start having like a lot of ideas. So I think for an artist to also see that a producer is basically like a team member, a lot like a manager or something. And, if you're trying to complete an entire album while you're working on all these different things, ultimately, like, a good producer is someone who can just like help you carry the load.
Yeah.
But, I think it's really critical as well to like work with people at the right point in your career. And I think it's really good, certain artists like yourself, it's like you just need to have that complete autonomy to like explore and to also like really find out who you are. And I really got to say, like, compared to when I started, when people didn't have the means to be able to fully explore their ideas in their own time so much, well, basically I feel like now music is a lot better and I get to work with artists who are like a lot more empowered and a lot more kind of in their own shoes. Do you know what I mean? And then also like, quite often I'll work with people like on their second or third album. If they're kind of self-produced artists, they might have done 2, even 3 albums. And there's been a few places where I'm like the first person they let kind of touch their music. And part of it is they're like, oh gosh, it's just so nice to be able to like not think about mixing anymore.
Yeah.
I'm tired.
It is. It's a very arduous process. Mixing is an arduous process, and it is very time consuming as well.
Totally. Yeah. So there's a thing as well, like I'm pretty fast at mixing now. Like it's, there's different ratios. Some people just come to me just to mix. Some people I just write with. Some people I do stuff from like writing right through to the final mixes. Other people, it's like here's all the songs and we pretty much like them, but we need to figure out how to make them work. So it's there's always like different contexts that you work with people in. But it's also just being at a point where if you've been working on an album for 10 months or something, you can have someone who come in who has no kind of preconceptions, has like fresh ears, and they're like stoked with new energy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just, it's often nice just having someone coming in and going like, oh my God, this song's great.
Yeah.
Let's turn up that bit. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So, that can work really well too. But I'm a firm believer really that it's like the kind of planets line up at the right time for you to work with different people. There's someone who I'm kind of getting involved in a big project with at the moment, and we first spoke together like 4 years ago.
Whoa, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, and it just now seemed to be the right point, in the relative trajectories. So, yeah, but that's also, I think, for me, getting back to like not feeling like I need to make a certain kind of stamp on each record, because there's just so many records being made. There's like an infinite well of music being made. Culture is a beautiful thing, and I just really have faith that, if I get on with someone, then the right context will turn up at the right time to work together. Yeah.
I think it's definitely like it's another artist in me kind of coming out, but I feel like if my mind's not into it, I know that I'm not going to be happy with the results. So the way I do it is because from my previous experience, I know that if I don't have my mind into something that I'm working on right now, it's going to come out like shit, basically. I just wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it because I know what the result is going to be like.
I
try to be sensitive.
It's a big insight. And I feel like I didn't learn that until like, quite far into my career. Yeah. And I think part of that comes out of like saying like you only have this little window of time in a studio. So it's just like, well, I'm going to work on it until it's good. And then it kind of never is. But when you come in fresh and you're like, okay, I'm excited, I see what this is supposed to be. Then instead of like working away on something for 15 hours, you work on it for 2 hours and you're like, oh yeah, that's much better.
I think the one thing that because I don't trust myself. I don't trust my feelings. I don't trust myself very well because I think, okay, I take that back because I think I've had quite like just a couple of projects where I was like, oh man, I don't want to do this. But I kind of do it, just kind of like white knuckle through it. And like in hindsight, when it's finished, I'm actually happy with it. I'm glad that I did it. Right. So there are quite a few instances where I'm not in the right mindset to do it. And I do it and it just turns out like shit. But there are also times when I kind of plow through it and I'm just actually really glad that I did it in hindsight. So I think it's like, I don't know if there's like the right way of like, do I go for it or do I not? Because, you know, this could actually be, this could actually result in something really amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's
Do you feel like do you sometimes feel excited like, oh, you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and this is really cool and I'm growing and it's uncomfortable but I'm cool? Or is like the feeling kind of quite similar and just like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think comfort zone thing is a big one. You know, like just trying new things that I've never done before. I think it just clenches anyone, even if it's not just. I think it's just trying new things. It's intimidating for anybody. I'm not too afraid to make mistakes though. I'm not too afraid to like mess up and like end up just embarrassing myself, because at the end of the day it's just me. It's just I'm just somebody in my room.
Yeah.
So I don't think like
we live in this amazing age as well where everyone has like an undo key on their computer, you know what I mean? It's like not that big a deal to try something and it doesn't work.
Yeah, and also I think it's just like, yeah, I think it's just people appreciate just I'd like to think that people appreciate just getting yourself out there. I'd like to believe it. I'd like to believe that people just like to see the imperfection of people, not just like some super polished, like super perfect, like, oh my God, her moves are so, like every single moves are on point, or like every single beat she creates or he creates is like super like fire, or, you know, I think people like to see that we all make mistakes, and I don't think not a lot of people nowadays still kind of put themselves out there just, you know, being the mistake-making humans that we all are, I think. I'm not very afraid. I'm not too afraid to like get out there and try new things and mess up. But
I'm really curious about how that applies also like with the whole curve of your channel, because I was like, before we hopped on, I was like, oh, I wonder what her first video was and when it was. So I went back and had a little look. So it was like that was only January last year, which is like not even 18 months. Yeah, 18 months ago. And then it's really interesting seeing the point where you like, you know, went like, well, I'm just going to do my own songs.
Yeah.
You know, but it's almost like if you hadn't had that momentum of actually like trying stuff and not being afraid and like posting stuff and putting it out, you know, kind of combining that then with like, oh, now the first thing I'm putting out is my own song. There's like so many emotions around it.
Yeah.
You know, you might have been, you could still be sitting here overthinking it
and
instead of hitting the post button, right? Yeah.
I think I've actually put down some songs that I've previously released on like Spotify and all the streaming sites, because it's like, oh, it's not the right microphone. It doesn't sound professional. Or it's like, it was like on this microphone and it wasn't like, it wasn't very well produced. And I've since upgraded to like a better like condenser microphone that has, you know, gives me a capacity to make it sound a bit more polished and like, you know, a bit more clean cut and nicer. But I've put down like 2-3 songs that had been previously released because I wasn't really confident with the way it sounded, and you know the whole.
Do you mean you took them off Spotify?
Yeah, I did.
Okay,
and
right.
I actually kind of regret it now, because it's like, and ever since, you know, feeling that tinge of like regret, I decided that I'm never going to put down songs that I've decided that I'm going to release and have released, because I feel like it's all a journey, and I'd like people to see that I have progressed over the years. And you know, it's like, it's fun to look back to an artist and like, oh my gosh, she actually made some not so good records.
yeah
And it doesn't sound very nice, it doesn't sound very polished, and I want people to look at it and see, like, you know, where people come from, you know, that we're not like, we all have.
I think that
beginnings.
That makes like music and creativity so interesting now, and I feel it's actually taken me a while to kind of understand that, because I basically like started in studios in the late 90s, so I'm showing my age a little bit. I'm very comfortable with my age, but you know, it's like I basically started in studios before, like a couple of years before broadband internet existed. So, you know, and like 10 years before smartphones existed.
Whoa.
So, you know, when I started, it was like dial-up.
What's a dial-up?
And dial-up is when you would have to like use the phone line to like connect to the internet, and it would go beep, 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 and then I mean no one did it because it was useless. You know what I mean? As like a few hardcore dudes would like, you know, as a university, people would like exchange academic papers, and there was like what was called bulletin boards. I wasn't part of that scene at all. But my point is, it's like, you know, I think a little bit of what you're getting to is, on one hand in music, we're kind of sold this idea of like this kind of genius just turns up like fully formed, and their debut album is like an all-time classic record, and it's a bit like an oasis in the desert. You know, because I remember as well when I started working with some of my heroes, basically when I was quite young in London. Like I moved over from New Zealand, and then, you know, within however many years was like working with Björk and Uncle and the Prodigy, and like they were like, oh my, you know, sorry, I was like, at them.
Yeah.
And hearing them talk about like some of their records, like, oh God, that record. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm really unhappy with that one. Or, you know, the Prodigy was a great one. There's a song called Smack My Bitch Up, and everyone who's like making electronic music would like play that record, and it was like the benchmark for the best sounding record. And like the kick drum on it goes boom, and everyone's like, how do we get our kick drum to sound like the one on Smack My Bitch Up? Then when I was working with the Prodigy, I was driving back from the studio with Liam Howlett this one day, who's the guy who makes all the music, and he's like, oh man, I hate that kick drum. I'm so unhappy with it. It sucks. And I was like, what? So it's like kind of, we have this weird idea that we're supposed to like go ta-da, like with this amazing thing. But we never know how anyone else is going to hear things. And I think it's just such a fascinating time now. That's where it was so cool going and seeing like your first video and talking to you like a day or two after you've like crested 100,000. You know what I mean? And just seeing how like, exactly like you say, that journey is what makes it so interesting.
For sure.
And we're in this really different environment now where, you know, it's almost like the more kind of authentic and chill you became, like the more interesting your stuff got.
It's so true. I think, and I'm grateful the scene has changed that way. And it's, you know, more and more people are just beginning to grasp the importance and the beauty of that. And I think my kind of main, I wouldn't say motivation, but kind of my main motif for all this kind of way of documenting things really came from me being in that position of being that fangirl, you know, like when I see my favorite artists out there, I'm like, oh, man, I want to see what, you know, I want to see where they came from. I want to see, you know, what their process is like. I want to see how they actually talk in real life. I want to see what their room looks like. I want to see, you know, how they dance. I want to see I want to hear their philosophy on everything in their life, you know? And I think that in turn made me want to, you know, kind of put myself in the same situation where I'm just kind of, you know, giving as much stuff away for people to look at and hear as possible. And I think it's fun. It's just fun for everybody.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I really like it. And I gotta say, even at this end, like, you know, I just started this Twitch stream like a couple of months ago, and part of it was like almost like just trying to shake off this whole. My version of overthinking is thinking that like I have to have like no interaction with the public, more or less.
Really?
Do you know what I mean? Like you're supposed to be mysterious or something. And this is a little bit like psychotherapist couch, kind of like, well, if I look deep down, you know, because I have had like an Instagram account for a few years. You know, but it's just this really interesting other thing of like, okay, well, let me just like be on the internet and anyone can ask me any question they want and I'll tell them exactly how I do everything.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? As opposed to like, I'm just meant to be like mysterious off in some studio somewhere. And it's just no fun, to be honest. You know, it's
and I think
so much more fun actually having a conversation with people.
And also, I personally think that producers are not. I'm not speaking for all producers out there. Obviously, there are some like super massive, like I don't really know the names or anything. I can't name anybody, but I don't know much to like name anybody in the industry. But there are like, I'm sure there are some like star producers or something, like super like big name producers, like big name artists. But I think generally music producers are so underrated. Just kind of their occupation and how, like, I actually personally didn't know what music producers did prior to actually getting into music production. So it was kind of like one of those kind of like fancy terms where it was like, oh, producer, music producer. It's like, oh, nice.
Yeah.
Like, but I don't actually know what they do. But turns out they
no one really knows what they do. Yeah.
But turns out they are actually they make the magic happen. You know, they. I personally think, you know, they are so underrated. You know, they're the ones.
Well, it's such a kind of funny thing because you don't even really know what it means on like from project to project.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's like producer in and of itself means so many different things. Like, you know, sometimes it means like someone with a laptop who makes beats. Sometimes it means like, you know, just the person who makes like an 8-bar loop. Sometimes it means a person who sits on the back of the room in a couch with a notebook, doesn't touch anything and just talks to people about what they're doing.
Really?
Sometimes it's a person I mean, that's traditionally what a producer was. So a producer, it's like, you know, in film production, the producer is a person who like runs all the spreadsheets. So it's only really, I think like mid 2000s it switched from people being called electronic musicians to being called producers.
Right.
And like in hip hop, it was like the producer was the person with the drum machine. But, you know, from having gone and, you know, sat in on some hip hop sessions, it's like aspects of production or the thing that I consider would be the producer in different types of music I'd work with, especially in the UK. It's like the engineers are doing that. You know, all the Timbaland records, this guy, Jimmy Douglas, was the one who actually turned a Timbaland beat into a record. But in the UK, when I came up, it's like if you had the computer and you made the beat, you were called a programmer.
Okay.
And then the producer would be like running it. So and then, you know, it's a running joke with Björk, like who knows what anyone's, like she's the producer of her records because she takes responsibility. Like I work as her kind of engineer, programmer, and all around sidekick. Some records I have production credits on. It's, you know, I literally was like band stuff. I have a notebook.
Yeah.
But then producer in this day and age also means like a certain type of artist. And it's normally an artist who's using technology to create records.
I think that's the main kind of terminology that I know as for the term producer. I think when I said like producers are underrated, I meant like the ones who are making the instrumentals, the ones who are kind of like behind the sound of it all. But I didn't actually know that there are different kind of like subgenres of producers. That's really interesting.
I mean, and originally, like, you know, going back to when a recording session would be like an hour long because studios were like so expensive, you know, the producer was a person who would like book the musicians, talk with like songwriters, go and like choose songs, liaise with the record company, tell everyone where to stand, make sure, you know, everyone was paid, make sure that everything sounded right. But the engineer would still be doing it. You'd have an arranger who would kind of figure out what everyone's parts would be. All the musicians would play stuff, but the producer would be the person who kind of tied all of that together. Yeah. And then I think what happened in a way was like when you started getting much more into kind of the studio as an instrument kind of record, so probably like starting with the late stages of the Beatles, when they were like some of the first people to just like stay in the studio for like days and days instead of going in for 2 hours. And started making crazy stuff in the studio. That was a very, very early seeds of like, producer as artist, but they were still produced by George Martin, but it was kind of the artist's ideas. So so it's you know it's a very open term, and in a way it's like you kind of need to listen to whichever kind of music, and figure out what that means. That's also where like a lot of records that I work on, my credit winds up being like additional production, because often you'll have producers in kind of the artistic sense that you're talking about. Will have got the record all to a certain stage, and then it's like, because I'm just like can come up with a plan basically. I can kind of talk to the artist, talk to everyone, figure out what needs to be done to actually deliver a record that can be mastered and put up on Spotify, basically finish it. So sometimes, you know, additional production for me, well, it's I mean, it's just like that final few
I
percent,
suck at it.
you know?
I suck at it because I it's like, and this is the interesting part, because I studied graphic design, and so that's kind of like my main background, I guess. I don't have any background in music, like in terms of like music production and writing songs. My background is design, actually, graphic design. And what really fascinated me about it is that everybody has like different little passions even within the process of like graphic designing. So there are people who are like, and I'm just generalizing, so there are all sorts of people in between, but in my experience it was either like people who are like just really into like the big ideas, and they're just like they just love like churning out, love like the whole picture and the ideas, and it's just like, oh, we can do this, we can do that, we can do this, we can do that. And there are other people who are like, who could spend hours after hours fine tuning like the millimeter of a difference of like a single type, and that's all they can do for hours on end. And it's like, for me, I think I was kind of more tilted towards the former.
Right.
And I suck at like details, and I suck at like really tuning into like the fine tuning part of the process. And I think it kind of extends into the music as well. Therefore, kind of me sucking at like wrapping anything up most of the time.
But I think that's what's great about what you're doing, is it's like you can really feel that the most important thing in any of the tracks that you're releasing is the idea and the kind of the concept that you're sharing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've also worked on so many records where it's like everything is sauce and there's no kind of vegetables. Do you know, like everything is the details, but there's no actual content. And I spent a lot of time when I was younger, especially when I did like a lot of kind of like left field club mixes and stuff, and weird remixes that was all meant to be really artsy, but I've spent like years of my life pushing like one note around on a computer screen, automating stuff, trying to make it exciting. And it is exciting to a certain extent, but if you don't have like, you know, that's where I'm most excited now about like, well, what's the artist trying to say? And that's what I'm actually really impressed with what you're doing, is like you're not letting any you can really just feel like your desire to communicate is the strongest thing.
Yes.
That's happening, you know what I mean? Because you could then say, you could record your song and then you might go, well, now I need to spend like 2 weeks finding the right kick drum or something like that.
Oh, I'm not good at that. I just like go like do.
But it's not going to be any better, is it? Yeah, exactly. And that was actually amazing. Like when I got to work on like Timbaland sessions with Björk, was just like seeing him come in and he'd go for literally like 10 minutes and then leave. And it's just like, what? Because I come out of this whole British school where it's like, oh, everything's like, they have a saying called a chin stroker. Everything's like, you know, how did you do that? And we're going to do this, and we're going to spend 5 days tweaking this one little thing, and then it doesn't make a difference.
Right. I mean, if it's fun, then like by all means, do it. Yeah. Like I think it's all about fun, and if you enjoy it, do it. And you know, regardless of, you know, how visible or how audible it is to like the public or the listener, if you enjoy it, just go for it. But
totally.
Personally, I'm just like kick drums, like test out 4 samples, and if I like that, I'm just going to go with it. Let's just go.
Love it. I love it. Yeah. Well, that's what I find is kind of, there's a big irony because, you know, you're doing your Overthinking series.
Yeah.
And my impression of you is that you don't overthink at all. You talk a lot about what you're thinking about, but if you're overthinking, like, you wouldn't be releasing anything.
That's actually true. I think...
I haven't like ruined the whole title or anything like that.
Oh, now I'm gonna start releasing songs like every 6 months. I think though, maybe music is like a little exception for me, because I tend to overthink about a lot of things, but I wouldn't say that music is one of them actually, because it's like, for me, I think I know why, because music, and I always say this, that music is a way for me to cope with my overthinking tendency. So it's not like another thing in my life that I overthink about, but it's actually a coping mechanism for the way I am about, like,
almost like a release valve or something like that. Yeah.
So I think hence the communication value, where it's just kind of like, okay, I'm overthinking about cheese tonight, so I'm going to write a song about cheese. Like, or like, so I think it's like, so I think I can be actually quite straightforward and just like, okay, I'm just gonna vomit out this song and like move on. And actually that's the fun part of it for me. So
totally. Yeah. No, that's great. I love it.
Yeah. So I think that's, does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, but that's where it's really interesting because it's like, you're thinking about stuff and you're having a thought, and then you've got a really amazing way to share that. I've worked with some people when they're like, well, on my first album, I used to just like write anything, and now like it takes me 2 months to write lyrics for a song. And people almost like get this kind of thing in their mind that things have to be like somehow. There's like this threshold of legitimacy you have to cross.
Oh, I hope I don't become like that. I hope I can just kind of keep it straightforward for the longest. That I
mean, that's what's really nice is you are actually admitting it's like, well, you're sharing the fact is like you have a tendency to think about life in general and all these other things in a particular way.
Yeah.
And then music becomes like a vehicle for releasing that, both literally releasing it and psychically releasing it.
So that's why I think like music is just like a tool for me to express myself. I think I can, and videos that I put out on YouTube is another way to express my whatever that I'm thinking about. And my journal is the way I kind of express myself and kind of treat as an outlet. Because I feel like I would go crazy without it. I would go crazy.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Hence me like deciding that, okay, I'm not gonna the standard 9 to 5 like corporate job it's not the way I'm gonna go with it.
Did you ever like work in a design agency or anything like that and have to have a cubicle?
I tried, not necessarily a cubicle. I think agencies are getting more and more like open spaced, and they're more like, they're more nurturing with the creative side of their designers and their creatives. So it's not as like cubically as it's like portrayed. Yeah. I think in like the mass media before, but I think it's just like working for other people and like having expectations to like meet different like qualifications for like briefs or whatever. And we have clients where I like, they have certain expectations for a brief. Yeah. And I have to be there to like tackle different like, and it just, I don't, it was just like building stuff up rather than like releasing stuff in my head. And
I guess you have to like serve so many different agendas then, don't you?
Yeah. Sorry, what was that?
Well, it's like in that kind of context, you have to serve so many different agendas. Like it's like the individual egos within like the agencies and then the company and then like what's the ultimate branding and what's this and then what's the market research, and there's so many different variables. It's like I'm really happy when I get to work mostly like with either a band or a solo artist, because it's like I can serve their agenda, but it's really clear where it's coming from.
Yeah, but it's just like one-on-one kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm totally happy with that. Then my partner is a director, so she does some commercials, and it's like, and she tells me about the number of people that are involved that all have all their different agendas and stuff. It's like, whoa, it's really, really intense. So I could imagine design world can be like that.
When it's like a corporation, it's like it's not just one entity. It's just like this like massive like umbrella of different qualifications and different like needs and different like rules and stuff. Yeah. And I think the thing is, I think it's just kind of like when I'm working for people, when I'm in a position where I am given a brief and I have a certain goal that a certain job to do for that person, it's not that I hate it, but it's like I'm actually like a perfectionist when it comes to working for other people. I have high it may not seem like it, but I have high expectations and I have high standards for the work. And so I kind of end up just burning out trying to like meet certain standards. And when the standard is my own standard, I guess it kind of releases certain level of pressure because it's me, it's just me. But when it's somebody else, I'm like, there is no compromise. I need to like meet this standard, and I need to like work, and I need to be at a certain value, and I need to, serve myself to like serve the others.
And does that create like a big overthinking loop as well? Like if you're working on something and then you start going, well, what are they going to think? And as opposed to just like, what do you think? And then you're kind of like can lose your objectivity going through that cycle.
Yeah, and if it's just, I think it's a mental thing where it's like, I need to I have to be at a certain level, or otherwise I'm gonna be doomed. Or I need to it's like I need to prove my worth. I need to prove my worth because they're paying me, and I need to be good. And so,
we've just lost your audio there.
Hello?
Oh, no, you're back. Hello. Oh no, you're back.
Oh
that
my
was
gosh.
just for 2 seconds.
Oh gosh.
Internet.
That's scary. That's scary. Actually, my laptop is really hot right now, and that gives me a lot of anxiety.
Oh, I'll bet.
It's okay. It's okay. I think it's okay.
I got to ask a whole totally different question. I saw you had a live stream on YouTube a while back. Are you doing those often? And how are you finding that whole process compared to making a video and releasing it?
Live streaming is still something that I'm really new with. And people have been very understanding with some of the technical difficulties that I've had so far when live streaming.
Yeah. What's been happening?
It's just pauses and it just lags so much, and my screen freezes, and whenever I tried making beats on Ableton live during live streaming, and every time I switch instruments it would just load in my screen, and my screen would just pause for 20 seconds.
Oh my God.
And people have been very understanding about it. But I think live streaming is really fun because I get to talk directly with the viewers, and it's exciting. I think it's really fun. I'm sure as having experience in Twitch. I don't know too much about Twitch, actually. I've never been on Twitch before. I don't play games either, so it's a whole uncharted territory.
I'd never gone on before I went on there, but I just thought I'll use that platform. But yeah, I mean, what I think is interesting with your stuff is because you got stuff on YouTube, so people are used to getting videos from you, and then it's you have a moment where it's oh, now we can talk to you live. So that kind of switchover must be really interesting, whereas everyone's on Twitch and just expecting people to have a camera. So it's kind of, do you know what I mean? I'm interested just about that kind of flip over from releasing stuff. And then also, because I'm behind the scenes on other people's projects or whatever, me kind of streaming is a little bit different. I take the approach of it's I kind of missed working in big studio facilities that had lots of different rooms. And that was really the start of my career, was you would always just be popping in and out of other people's studios and kind of seeing what's going on, or someone would come in and sit on the sofa in your room. So it's kind of a bit I wanted to just try to recreate that experience. Yeah, and then also, to be honest, it's I'm by no means old, but I was by the time, at the age I'm at now, the producer I learned from was younger than I am now when I started really learning from him. So I was in the way that our industry is set up now, I'm not really in a position to have someone in with me full time. So I was well, how am I going to actually start sharing some knowledge and ideas? So I was well, let me just start putting some stuff on the internet.
Yeah.
And so that's been really interesting, actually, when people can come on and ask stuff.
I think it's super valuable. It's super valuable when you have somebody sitting there to answer any questions that you have in your mind right now, whether that may be about production or engineering. Frankly speaking, I have not been in that position where I can actually give advice in terms of production and songwriting, because I know nothing about production. I know nothing about it. But I think,
know enough to get songs out, which, I mean, give yourself some credit, like you're saying. People don't really value it. And the weird thing is, it's so hard to actually value what you've learned yourself, because it seems well, obviously I know that. So, don't go undervaluing what you got going on.
I think, I mean... Yeah.
But do you find it interesting? Is it people who I guess people who subscribe to your channel who'd probably turn up to your live streams are obviously going to be fans of your music, and people who understand more about your life and your themes and stuff. So is it kind of fun because then it's the ideas that you have in your songs, do you wind up talking to them about those kinds of ideas a bit more, as opposed to yo, now I'm going to program a hi-hat?
No, it's more of the former. More I call my live streams chill sessions, where I just just sit there and just talk. And I actually recently stopped making beats all together during live stream because I was
That's
so
great.
stressed out about the lag.
Yeah.
And like I was so scared to change instruments. I was done with it. So I actually recently just had pulled up my Photoshop and just started drawing with people, just like doodled.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just doodled. And I think again, it just goes back to like the way I have always felt about my favorite artists. Like I'm a huge fan of Joji. Everybody knows that. And it's like, oh my gosh, how lovely would that be if I could just be there in the chat when Joji's going live on YouTube. It's like, you know, it comes from that kind of idea, and I want to, like, if I'm ever in that position, I would want to do it for people. So hence the live streams. But
was it like a nice moment for you? Like, did it feel different to kind of be talking to people in real time? Like internally, your subjective experience, or was it more like too stressful on the first ones where the computer was crashing, so you didn't get to enjoy it until you kind of chilled it out a bit?
I enjoyed it nonetheless because I think, you know, like people were super understanding about it, which was which I'm so grateful about. But also, it's like it's kind of weird because it's like I almost wish I could hear them. I could like listen to them. Like I could actually listen to them and I could give them hugs or whatever. But it's kind of like just me sitting there with my laptop and I'm just staring at a chat box. But I think it's just like another little step that I'm taking the live stream as a way to kind of turn this whole communication, this whole community into a more tangible thing for everybody rather than just me passively making videos and just putting it out there. I think that's really cool. Yeah, I think the whole community thing, just communication and having like a conversation with people it excites me. It's fun.
It's wild just knowing there's people out there. It's like we know it intellectually, like there's 7 billion people on the planet. But I've just found it really fascinating. Just, you know, people pop up from different corners of the world and you ask what they're up to and then you actually get to know them. As well, you know, and then it's like, you know, if someone hasn't been on for like 10 days or whatever, and then they pop up, I've been like, oh, I've been worried about you, you know, are you okay?
Yeah.
That's kind of it. And I find that human side of it is just genuinely lovely.
Yes.
You know, and when, you know, people come on from different countries, like, this guy Benjamin in Seoul, when he first came on, I was like, oh my God. And he started turning up regularly. And there's been, you know, people in India who start turning up regularly and people in Russia and, you know, up and down the Americas and in Europe. And I just find that like so nice just to connect with like a whole world of people. Like it's, you know, especially like, you know, at the moment that with me in lockdown here in LA, you know, I mean, it's not officially lockdown, which is what's even more terrifying because the cases are going through the roof with COVID.
Yeah.
But just, you know, it's like some version of a social life, you know, and I guess that's why Twitch had actually been popular before that anyway, you know.
I think it's as Twitch streaming, live streaming, anything like virtual online, I think it's as legitimate as any like real life encounters. And I think people are like, this whole like COVID-19 situation was a way for everybody to realize the validity in that.
Totally.
It's like, you know, gaming. I feel like those kind of things have been quite underrated. And there have been definitely like there are definitely lots of downsides to that. But also, I think the community side of it, the conversation side of it, and the way it can actually help a lot of people mentally is it shouldn't ever be under acknowledged, I think.
Yeah, and it's like the hardest thing to explain to people who don't do it.
Yes, for sure.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
when
it's like,
they look at it,
like, those kids who are just spending hours
playing games, and it's like, have you ever tried, like, you know, and I started playing Minecraft with my daughter when she was like 6 or 7, and it's like, whoa, like this is insane. And my son lets me like hang out with him and his friends on like Fortnite squads and stuff. And it's kind of like, could you imagine like when you were like, you know, young, like having your parents hang out with you and your group of friends? You'd be like, go away, like you're embarrassing me. But
it's a whole new channel of conversation.
Yeah, and just actually for me as a parent, being able to like experience it firsthand with my kids.
Yeah.
And also because, you know, when I was a little kid, like I played video games a lot, but they're very different to now.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It was much more like Donkey Kong or whatever, like quite basic stuff. And, and get into like understanding how deep like kind of open world stuff is in Minecraft, and creativity and cooperation.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I am not, frankly, good at gaming. I'm not a gamer. I can't play games. So I've never actually personally experienced like the community side of gaming, but at least from like in terms of virtual communication, in terms of like communicating with people through comments or like live stream chats or things like that, I have personally gained so much help, like mental help, through that channel. It's like, I've struggled with loneliness quite a while now, and pretty much all my life, I guess. But it's really helped me. It helps a lot. And those are real people behind the screens, behind these comments. Those are real people. It's not like some bots who are like just beep bop beep bop. Those are real people.
Totally. Yeah. And it tends to be people who are similar in terms of might be like a bit more introspective, or might, not be like so socially outgoing and gregarious. And it's like kind of that becomes like a really nice
culture
conduit in which you kind of meet people on a similar wavelength.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think though, I do kind of want to. I do miss people. I do miss like real.
I know what you mean.
I'm sure everybody is at the moment.
Yeah.
But I miss people, and I completely agree with like it's just so interesting to meet people from my favorite phrase. One of my favorite phrases is like people from all walks of life. I think that's such a beautiful phrase. Like it's like everybody has different paths, and I think it's so easy for us to like get caught up in like, oh, my life is like, oh, my life is just my life, and all the other people are just like extras. But like if you just kind of take a step back, you realize that there are 7 billion people around you who have just have all sorts of lives, and it's like you walk down the street and all these people have had their lives the same as the same, like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like they all have their own lives, and it's just kind of weird. It kind of like freaks me out sometimes, but in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, you really need to stop and think about it, don't you? Like everyone is experiencing the same degree of kind of internal complexity, but their own version of it, which, and just, trying to wrap your head around those numbers. It's like, have you seen, there's been like a few things circulating around the internet recently where people are, with the kind of political and socioeconomic situation around COVID, they're talking about like the human brain is ill-equipped to understand the difference between like being a millionaire and being a billionaire. And I'm going to get this wrong. It's something like if $1 million was the equivalent of like 11 minutes, then it's like $1 billion is 32 years. Because we just think like, oh, you say a million and a billion is next. Like it's 2 and then 3.
Right.
So it's almost like when you start thinking about like, oh, everyone has their own internal and subjective experience. It's like for a human being, your own experience is so vast and so kind of all encompassing that trying to understand that everyone else is having that. It's like, it's kind of you really almost like have to dedicate 100% of your attention and energy and really like meditate on that. And then when you try to get into like, and there's 7 billion, and counting, and everyone has their own kind of like wishes and dreams and happinesses and doubts and fears. And, it's pretty wild.
It's crazy. I wonder if it's all going to make sense when we die. Cause it better do. It better do. Cause I want to get behind this. I want to get behind this whole whole mystery of life, and we're probably only just gonna get a glimpse of like the tippest tip of the iceberg of the whole picture while we're alive in this short life. It's kind of sad, wild, isn't it? But
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's God, the Brazilians have like good words for stuff like that.
Are they like in Brazil? Are they in a different language? I'm assuming that they're.
Yeah, it's like It's German has like all these really long kind of compound words, that
Right.
like mean a specific thing, but it's basically all these words stuck together. But then like the Brazilians have a whole bunch of words to describe emotional states where there's like no direct comparison in like English.
Oh yeah, we have those in Korean as well. Like we
I'll
have
bet. What are your good ones?
we have like a phrase that describes, not a phrase, it's like a word that describes the way turtles walk, basically. So it's like
Yeah.
it's like ongum ongum. It's the way turtles
Uh-huh.
walk. It's like
Right.
ongum.
Right. Okay.
Or it's like they have the same thing with like hopping motions. So it's like
Mhm.
I guess the only equivalent to it is like hopping, hop, I guess.
Right.
But it's like
yeah.
the motion of it. We have a word to describe the motion of it, which is
Uh-huh.
깡총. It's like
Right.
깡총.
Amazing.
But yeah, that's. But I'm sure they have similar things in different languages.
It's weird though, isn't it? Just like so many different ways of experiencing life and thinking about things, and
Yes.
you know what beliefs are and how we look at the world is totally affected by our beliefs. And then when you get into like, well, what is a belief? I just came across this thing recently. A belief is just a thought that you think more than once. So you just change the things
Really?
you think, and then
Oh.
you change your beliefs, and then your beliefs shape how you see the world, because there's so much information that our brains actually filter things down to like a tiny stream that our conscious minds can kind of process.
Yes.
So, you know, we're starting to dive off the deep end here, but you know, it's if you're getting back to the overthinking theme, it's like if you're going to devote a lot of time to thinking about stuff, I think, you know, this whole kind of like nature of like what is reality and who are we and what is experience and why do I think the things I do and what are feelings, you know, that's all pretty amazing. And I think that's also what makes music so fascinating.
I think for
is, you know,
me,
you-
I actually want to ask you a question, because for me, everything that I talk about, whether that may be cheese or plush toys or music,
Yeah.
actually, or like candies or sweets or wardrobe or clothing, everything that I talk about could be directly related, not directly, but could be remotely related to music, because that's just the way I approach making music. But is it kind of like for you, production and what you do for your job is like completely different from kind of your philosophical view of life and kind of like
No, I think they 100% feed into each other.
yeah.
And that's kind of, you know, it's just like every musical artist or every human is different. Every kind of producer, in my sense of the word, is quite different. But for me, again, it's like the fascination is really to try to understand like the subjective world of the artist. You know, so I think a lot about this kind of stuff, and I have a lot of these conversations with artists, and you know, so I wouldn't say I consciously think like, oh, it's a metaphysical process, but I actively encourage my artists to kind of imprint my subconscious. Like I was actually on a call with a Korean American artist this morning who I'm going to do some mixes for.
Nice.
And anytime I work with people, it's like I ask them to like make me just like, you know, it's like playlists, lists of things they like. I leave the door totally open.
Yeah.
Just fire me any thoughts you have anytime, day or night, because it's not like I need to actually process them or do something specific with it. But it's like I want you to kind of basically influence my belief system,
Whoa.
as it were. Do you know what I mean?
Whoa.
Like you get a chance to start imprinting yourself on my subconscious. I'm not going to overthink this stuff. It's like I'll just listen to people's playlists while I'm cooking.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be like, I want this song to sound like this record. It's just like, this is the stuff I like in general. And I just listen to it in this very loose way. I'm not trying to process it with my frontal lobe so much.
Nice.
But, you know, so much of that then becomes, it has real practical applications, which is like, what is the language that you use with each artist? What are the ways to kind of bring the best out of them or to give them the most space to be themselves? I had a conversation with another artist earlier this morning that I've just started working with on a bigger project. And they're like, hey, you know, all this stuff that you told me, like, I don't need that. And it was really nice that they're actually able to be so direct. Like, that's unnecessary.
Right.
Just tell me that first bit. And I was
Okay.
like, great. And they're like, if we get into a situation where that stuff might be necessary, we'll know and we'll talk about that. So, you know, even just like being aware of how we think, how the other person thinks, and kind of having like a really clear, open channel of trust between artist and producer for me is like really important. But I really see myself as like a tool for the artist.
Whoa. So there's like,
do you
for
know-
you, it's almost like there's another layer of like putting your psychosis into like, I don't know if that's the right word. I don't know. Like I'm
Let's
just
say
using
psyche,
smart word. I'm just
consciousness or
using
something
big
like that,
word.
yeah.
I just wanted to use the word psychosis.
Psychosis has some negative connotations
Oh, sorry.
or whatever.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to use some big words.
Yeah.
It's so basically you have like another different layer of like putting being in the position where you're just trying to understand somebody else's kind of view and their visions of like whatever they're trying to.
100%. That's exactly
so interesting.
it. Yeah. And then it's like, you know, because it's like I'm nothing without my artists. Do you know what I mean? So I really treasure and value my artists, and I'm lucky that I'm at a point where, you know, the people who tend to approach me to work with me through my body of work tend to have a good sense that we're on like a similar wavelength.
Yeah.
So, but pretty much everything that I get to work on is an artist that I really believe in. Do you know what I mean? And so like I have the trust in their vision, because also like through the earlier stages of my career when it was much more like, yo, I've just figured out this crazy edit and how to automate this thing and we're going to do it on your record, you know?
Right.
Which I wouldn't necessarily have that conversation out loud, but it's a bit like, you know, it was always a joke with musicians, like someone's just been practicing this one drum fill and then they get into play on the song and they're just like trying to put the drum fill on the song everywhere. There's a saying in English which is if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Do you know what that means? So it's it's like you try to do the same thing to everything.
Right.
Whereas
which
I'm
is
now
not...
at a point where it's, but I've worked in so many different contexts, and I have like, you know, I can work exclusively with live bands. I can work with just an artist where I'm like programming everything from scratch. I basically have like this massively broad skill set that I've spent years on each individual aspect of it.
Yeah.
So it's like some projects need these things and some projects need that thing. But for me, the key thing is that I listen to the artist, not just directly what they're saying, but like with my intuition, and then bring in the things that I think could really help the project.
Right.
But I've always found that the records that are the best, or the ones that I love the most, or the ones that mean the most to people, are the ones where that message, whether it's a literal message of like about cheese, or like a kind of a emotional message that's being conveyed that's not so much about lyrics, like that message is coming through. So I'm 100% like focused on how can we get this message through.
So,
but then when you're also dealing with the practicalities of like, we need to turn like this concept or this feeling
into an actual song,
into an actual finished record,
So it's kind of really like that balance between the technical side and like the more kind of mental, more kind of, I wouldn't say spiritual, but more like kind of like in the head's like more conversational.
Yeah, I mean, spiritual basically means like things that we can't see or touch.
So spiritual.
Yeah, so, you know, you could call it that. But I mean, it's much more like, it's not even so much as one thing balancing the other, because it's much more that like all of the technical stuff and all of the aesthetic stuff is in service to like this higher kind of concept.
So say if you, like, I'm just trying to imagine what it's like to work, for you to work with an artist. Because I'm just curious to know what it's like. So say if you like get in a room or like start, say if you start working with an artist, is it like, is it like, okay, let's talk about life? Or is it like, who starts the conversation? Or like, how do you even start working with an artist? Or like, how do you, what's the process like from...
I mean, it really is just like a conversation. It's just exactly like the conversation we've had now. You start with like, hi. Then what are you up to? I'm doing this. Oh, what have you been listening to? What have you been doing? What are you thinking? You know, so but in general, I'm never really like thrown into a room to work with someone before having a conversation. Although there is, funnily enough, a bit of an exception, because part of why I moved to LA was to be able to do a lot more writing with people, because there's a really, really big writing community here, and you tend to have artists from all over the world who come in to do like a few weeks of writing in LA.
Yeah.
So paradoxically, the kind of most intimate situation, which is writing with people, is the one where you have the least run up, or like the least preamble, whereas when I'm kind of producing, there's a lot of like, oh, here's all your songs and what are you trying to achieve. But really you just listen to people, you know what I mean? You make something and you go like, oh, what do you think of that? Oh, more like this, okay, and you know, off you go. Or you know, you might say like, hey, this has made me think about this, can we try that, and we'll just see where it goes. But you know, one thing I feel like I don't care where the idea comes from. So a lot of the time I just try to keep the process moving, if that makes sense as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, especially with newer artists, is like just really helping them understand that I'm on their team. And there's always, you know, there's often stuff where there's an artist in Australia where I got flown over to work with her. First couple of songs, like she came in the morning and I'd like programmed a beat for her. it was like she had her songs made and she really liked them. Then the third day she came in and she just didn't like the beat and she kind of like freaked out because she didn't know. And
Was she like,
I went and talked to her.
I
She was
hate
like,
it,
oh,
or
that
was
might,
it
she was
like-
like, that might be a bit boppy. And then she kind of like left the room.
Oh,
So I had to go
that's
and like
dramatic.
sit down with her and say like, hey, just like, so you know, like all I care about is making a record you like we can get rid of
Wow.
that and start again. And, you know, and she actually talked about that. We did a second record together and she said like that moment of like realizing like, oh, like I can just tell you something was like quite pivotal, you know? But you know, then there's different things like if I'm producing a band, it's really like it tends to be they have so much of the identity in the way they play. So, you know, a lot of that becomes like how to get the best performance out of someone,
Yeah.
which is kind of a different art to if I'm working with like a vocalist or other like self-produced artists, because I do work a lot with self-produced artists and it's kind of like, you know, figure out how to kind of like embellish stuff and we're all like programming and everything. But when you're working with a band and a performance-based thing, it's, you know, really gets into like how can we make sure that what everyone's playing is working the best possible, because you'll often find like, you know, some bands like the guitarist will just be kind of like noodling. It's like there's a chords that are kind of going blah, 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 and then it's like, can we turn this into a part? You're trying to get everyone to play stuff together. It's like, hey, look, if we kind of pulled this section of the song out here and you kind of went a bit louder there, where does
Okay.
that get you to? But yeah, bands are often the ones who can be, you know, there'll be one person in the band who's like a bit standoffish or whatever. You know?
When actually,
So a lot of that,
sorry, continue.
I was just going to say, like, when you get into bands, a lot of it, there's a lot more like kind of dealing with personalities
Yeah.
and group dynamics and that kind of thing, which I'm fine at. And that's where you tend to get, especially, you know, when you get into more like aggressive forms of music, producers tend to be more and more like dominant guys, you know, because it's
Like,
like
you
you got
do
to
this,
dominate everyone and
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? And it's like, I'm the sergeant, you're the soldiers kind
Yeah.
of thing. And, you know,
Like being the
but a
conductor
lot
of
that's
everything, basically.
kind of thing. But yeah, some of that is just like, hey, we have 5 days, and if you guys are going to argue about this, you know.
Just gonna be the parent here. I'm gonna play the
Yeah.
to play the bad cop. Okay, well,
Totally.
I think that's really interesting because I've always wondered when bands are in, like, say, in a studio and recording a song, is it like, say it's like a traditional kind of like rock band where there's like the guitar, the bass guitar, the drummer, and like the lead singer. Is it like, do they separately record each instrument, or is it like, do they all play 3, 2, 1, go, all play once from back to back, or is it like?
The best answer is it depends.
I kind of saw that
and
coming, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a few ways, but one of the kind of really it's down to how good the band is. And you know, when you look back to like classic rock, like the 60s and 70s or 50s, or, you know, like my family's from Liverpool, so let's say the Beatles, for example, it's like back then, before there was the internet and before there was computer games and before there was like all these other entertainments, it was like, you know, before there was even really a music industry, bands would often have like a residency. Like the Beatles had a residency in like Hamburg where they played for like 4 hours a night, 7 days a week.
Yes, I
or,
heard
you know,
that story where they were
yeah.
just playing nonstop, basically.
Non-stop, yeah. And then, you know, in LA, it was like the Doors had a residency at like the Whiskey A Go-Go or something like that, for like 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And so you'd get these bands that would come in and they could just like play like so well. And
Hours,
so all you
yeah.
had to do was like capture their performance. And so
Right.
there's a school of rock record production that is like, there's a guy called Steve Albini who's like a really famous like grumpy punk. Who's great, by the way. He's like really good at what he does, but he's like, my job is to document the performance. And it's like, you know, I experimented a little bit with that when I was younger, and it was like really nice, but I also felt for me like I'm looking for a bit of magic for it to be beyond just what's happening in a room. And like in Canada, there's two camps of like people in Canada. One is like, oh, we did it live off the floor, and it's like, hey. Neat, you know, and then there's people who are like, oh, they did it live off the floor, neat, you know.
Right.
So, but, you know, depending on what the song is, like some songs you really need like that core performance to like build around. Often if I do work with a band, I don't do it as much, but they tend to want to pull me in because they're looking to do something like a little bit weirder.
Okay.
Or they're looking to like expand their
Right.
sound a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they're not getting like the dude who did like Nickelback. They're getting the guy who did Björk.
Right.
Do you
Yes.
know what I mean? So
see.
it's like bring a different dimension
Yeah,
into our
yeah, yeah.
music. But I'm there's not, again, I mean, this is just like straight up facts. There's not many people who can step between like electronic music and music technology into like performance world and get them all to knit together.
Yeah,
and
and that's where you come in, and you can kind of help spice things up.
Correct. Yeah. But there's like logistically getting those worlds to mesh is like a lot more complex than it sounds. Like the analogy I always make is like, making music on computers is a bit like you're making Toy Story, like you're making a Pixar film. And band records are like, Scorsese films from the 70s. And if you just try and stick them together, like they don't kind of inhabit the same world. So it's like how you have to like, it's a little bit esoteric, but you need to like move the electronics a bit in terms of how they interact with like time and space into like the live world. And you need to kind of slightly fragment the live world and move it a little bit in the electronic dimension. So it gets into like, how do you get like seamless CGI kind of computer graphics or something.
I've actually been listening to a band called Parcels, and yes, Parcels. And they actually did a really interesting collaboration with Daft Punk, where it's like Daft Punk produced the track for their debut single, I think. It's like a really interesting mix of like rock, kind of like Beatles kind of soft rock plus like some electronic stuff. And it's like really it's really, really interesting. It's good it's good songs as well. I just love it when there's like a push of a boundary of a certain genre.
Totally. Yeah.
It's like, yes, there are like certain kind of stereotypical sounds of a genre, like say what to expect from a jazz record, but I always love it when it's like this kind of thing that just stands on its own, and it's like you can't really put a word to like what the genre is, but it's a good song and it sounds nice. And I think
it's I was gonna say it's a bit like we were talking earlier about like traveling to make a record. So it's always like when you have like an unfamiliar context, you tend to get interesting things when two things that don't necessarily belong together are put together. Or, belong together isn't quite the right word. But yeah, you create these new situations where interesting things can happen.
Yes.
So, and I love being able to do projects where it's not just like, well, this is how it's done, where it's got a bit of a kind of journey of exploration to the whole thing.
I think this was the thought process that mainly went through my head when I first started like mainly releasing songs on Spotify and like the streaming sites. I no longer have that problem because I've decided that I'm gonna just let go of all the rules and just make whatever that sounds good to me. But when I first started, I was like, oh, should I be like a bedroom pop singer, or should I be like a jazz singer? Should I be like a rock singer, or should I like, what should my song sound like, and should it be consistent throughout all the records that I put out? And I think that's a question that a lot of people have. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the question that a lot of people have when they first start out. It's like, do I need to jump into the picture with the whole concept in mind and like a properly set like genre for myself, or do I just go in? For me personally, I think it just creates a barrier for a whole new like chance of creativity to happen. Like I think just being confined by, is this like in genre? Is this like on point with the genre that I'm going with? I think that just kind of limits the way people can be creative with music and sound. I think it's just, for me, it's always like just making stuff that sounds good, sounds nice, regardless of whether it sounds jazzy enough or rocky enough or poppy enough.
I think you sum that up so well, and it's like you'll really often see it's people who haven't actually put out that much stuff or any stuff who spend the most time thinking about that, and that's where it becomes like the biggest obstacle. And earlier we were talking about like, the fact that like now you're kind of releasing original stuff, whereas you started doing covers, and it's like the fact that you kind of were just like having stuff putting out, you're used to the feeling of putting things out.
It's
which
definitely
like gave
a habit.
you such a good springboard to but I think have these very funny conversations sometimes when people, you know, every now and then you'll have someone who kind of wants me to describe exactly what the record is going to sound like before we start.
Okay.
And it's like, you know, we can look at some stuff like this, but you never, it's always, there's a saying, which is like, God, I want to say it's like Rumi or Paulo Coelho or something like that. But it's basically like the map making itself brings forth the features of the terrain.
Right.
In other words, by like, you only find out what's there by going in there. It's like you won't have the map before you start.
No.
And yeah, it's always been like, you know, really great albums that I've worked on or albums that I really love. There's always this interesting point where if you're really immersed in it, you know, the first 2/3 is kind of hunting around and like tracks take forever. And then about 2/3 of the way through, there's very often like this really magical moment where it suddenly kind of all comes into focus and you then understand what the record is. And then it's like so super clear what has to happen to everything. But if you hadn't gone through that process of like trying and experimenting and you thinking something's done and, you know, moving forward, then you'd have never got to that moment.
It's not going to be fun. And probably the end result is not going to be as like creative and good, and doesn't like all songs, like every single song that one makes doesn't have to be groundbreaking, but for me it has to be groundbreaking in my own standards for myself. I think that's the only standard that I have for myself. It's like every song that I put out has to be groundbreaking and different from the one that I previously put out. I think that's the only genre rules that I have. It's like like I think people like ask what the inspirations is, like who do you listen to, like who do you get the biggest inspiration from, and I say like, oh, Amy Winehouse, but there's also Coldplay and there's also Joji and there's also like some YouTube music going on in there. And it's like, I think that's pretty much the same for everybody. We don't just listen to one single genre of music and hence don't get influenced by one single genre or like one single kind of sound. It's like everything just kind of feeds into each other, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, when you know, you're talking about like if you might have like one of the ways you're writing is like you write out all your lyrics.
Yes.
Like that just all comes to you in one go. And then like what's your experience when you're actually putting music to that, right? It's not like you're listening to Amy Winehouse, you're listening to what the song wants, right?
Yes. I think, and that's why I don't know what to say when, like, it's like, what's your inspiration? It's like
cheese.
Yes, exactly. Like, it's not just music. It's just like I think I do hear when I listen to songs, like I do have times when I'm like, wow, that's such a cool like sound effect. I would love to like do something similar to some of my songs someday. But it's like when I actually just sit down to make beats or songs and instrumentals, it's like, oh, I want to listen to some synths. Okay, let's go for some synths. And it's just like building. And, this bass doesn't sound right with all the other instruments. So I'll just go the one right below that. And that sounds pretty cool. I'll just go with that.
Totally, yeah. So it's like the speakers start telling you what they want.
Yeah. And it just, I just run from there. It's just...
Yeah.
It's kind of like a roll, like a snowball. It just kind of rolls down. And
Absolutely.
I do have times when I'm producing a record and it's like, I don't know when to stop. When is the right time to stop? You know, it's like, because I've had times when I was like, okay, I think I'm done with this. And somebody would come in or like, oh, maybe I could just like, and say like, you can maybe add some few instruments or add a few more spices in there. Or I would just sometimes tell myself that maybe I'll just work a little bit more on it, and I would do it, and it ends up sounding a lot better than before. But sometimes I'm like, how far can I take this? Like, is this too much, or is this like the right time to finish it? It's like, cause I've been there before. Like I've been in a place where I've made things better, but I don't know where to stop. Like, it's like, I don't know when to stop. So I just stop.
Have you heard that quote, like a work of art is never finished, merely abandoned?
Yes.
Which is, in other words, you could keep tweaking forever. But I mean, that's such a fascinating question, isn't it? Like, what is done?
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wild one.
How do you finish it? Like, is it like, okay, I think we're, this is pretty good. I like it.
Well, I mean, it depends. Like, there's a different phases for sure. But in a way, like, I try to do any of my phases like running on as much instinct as possible, and I try to like switch between times when you're purely, it's like, it's all idea generation and you don't have like the editor brain switched on, and then times where you come back and you kind of listen to it with a different headspace, if you know what I mean.
Fresh ears.
Yeah, fresh ears, but also like, okay, now let's go through and see which of these things are working. Whereas like, the earlier phase is let's just try as many things as we possibly can, and we're just going to record really fast, and we're not going to like sit here and guess yes or no.
Yeah,
and you just kind of follow the whole process. Yeah. But then in terms of, the whole thing we keep talking about of like, I deliver finished records, I just basically, I mix stuff, and I used to take like on average a day and a half per mix. And now on average, the actual mixing bit is like half a day, both because I've practiced a ton and I'm really good at it. And I've figured out all my systems, and I've kind of like got a ton of settings, and I have all these things like available to work really quickly, but also fundamentally because I used to spend hours and hours and hours on tiny details.
Yes.
And I used to spend a lot of time, a bit like what you're talking about with when you work for other people, like getting worried like, oh, if this isn't absolutely perfect, then this person's going to think I suck and I'm going to get fired. And I got a lot better at like, let me just really, really follow my instinct on this, not overthink it. And when I'm like, this feels good, then I send it to my artist, and then, let them listen to it with fresh ears. And do you know what I mean? So it's like I've just decided to like cut off a whole chunk of time where the track isn't really making a lot of progress. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it might
but you're
not
just
really
spending loads of time on it.
Loads of time kind of changing things, and then also there's a whole bunch of things I used to do that actually make no difference.
Yeah.
That I would convince myself made difference. But that's not to say I don't go like really, really deep into detail, but it's much more of like if I'm excited and I'm feeling like, again, like the speakers are saying like, oh, this bit here, we just need to pull that back there, or that bit there, we just need, that needs to push. Okay, this thing's clashing with that. It's like when that whole flow is happening.
Yeah.
And then otherwise it's like getting really good at like switching between kind of creator mode or tweaker mode and like listener mode. So being able to go boom and then just like play the track through and listening to how you respond to the whole journey of it. But that one in a way is like has almost taken the most time to develop, because you have to like let your own mind get out of the way and kind of listen in a slightly different way. So that might even literally be like you just like pick up the phone and you slide to the other side of the room and you like scroll through something while the track is playing, and then sometimes something will jump out, and then there's like I'm gonna turn it up really loud and like close my eyes and be fully immersed. But in general, it's like I know when it's feeling good and I'm not just nothing else is speaking to me in the speakers, and I send it off and see what people think.
I think trusting, I'm still learning, but kind of like learning to trust my gut instinct is the key. Like, is my gut telling me like this is good enough? I can finish it off. Like I said, I still don't trust myself. I don't think I ever will, but I think I just need to kind of learn to.
I'm going to argue with you on that point. I think you trust yourself a lot. And
I think
basically
different
because it's like you put out music, and it's like, I'm going to just, this is a guess, a hypothesis, and I'd love you to tell me I'm wrong or more bounce off it, right? It's not a right or wrong. But I think it's like you seem to have like, this is your idea or the concept that you want to communicate. And then I think you can listen to something and say like, is it communicating the idea? And that's probably for you more when something's done.
I definitely know what I want. I think I know. I'm very clear on knowing what I want. But I think like at least when it comes to like feelings and like more like towards the emotional side of things, because it gets affected with my physical state and my life circumstances, and it just all feeds into the way I feel, and it doesn't necessarily give me an objective perspective of like producing a track, or it all feeds in the emotion, and it's not necessarily always about the track itself. So kind of letting my emotions dictate whether or not I'm going to finish this track is something that I find a little bit risky, because it's just.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So it's like.
So you're kind of like aware enough of how your internal state is almost like can be playing a trick on you.
Yeah, it's like don't feel very comfortable finishing off a track when I'm feeling shit. But it could actually, in real life, the track itself could actually be really good. You know, it's ready to be finished. But it's just some stuff that's happening in my life is affecting the way I feel. And it's in turn kind of making me feel like, oh, I feel shit. So therefore, the record that I'm producing right now is shit, you know?
You know, but that is such an amazing insight. And you'd be astonished how few people have figured that out.
Yeah.
You should be really proud of that. I think I only came across that concept really consciously in the last couple of years.
Yeah,
and that is such a key thing.
I think it's
So I'm going to big you up on that one, and just being able to articulate it in that way is like really great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, it's like oh, thank you. I compliments. I get really embarrassed when I get like any sort of like anything related.
Oh, just you know.
Take it in. I'll take
acknowledge
it.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah.
I think we can. I think we're kind of ready to wrap it up. I have like. Thanks. You think it's ready to?
I mean, there's a lot in there, and we could talk about this like for a lifetime.
We could probably.
Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like an endless conversation, but I think we're on up to 2 hours now.
Yeah.
So,
I actually have one last question that I'd love to.
Okay.
I would have loved to ask you this question when I first started making music in my room. And I'm sure there are loads of people who are in that same position. Is there like any advice that you would want to give to fellow like bedroom producers who are just starting to make music and just starting out, and it's like, you know, just I'm here alone in my room.
I feel in many ways like everything you've shared is absolutely perfect. But finally, I'm just realizing like I started recording on my own in a room, but at that stage, you could only get like a cassette 4-track. So I was a bedroom producer when I was 15.
Yeah.
Couldn't make records sound as good as they do now. But I'd really just sum it up to like just follow what you're interested in.
I agree.
And listen to your own interests far more than thinking there's like some right way or wrong way to do it. Because I think the whole virtue of being able to like be a bedroom producer basically is that you can develop your own sound in your own style. And the only way you'll develop your own sound in your own style is just following your own interests and what you're curious about. And yeah, don't be shy, right?
Yeah, just get yourself out there. Even if it's shit, just get yourself out there.
Well, yeah, I love what you're saying about get yourself out there as well. But yeah, it's also like who's to judge if it's shit? You know what I mean? Like there's so many things that are tied up. I mean, but just don't be shy. And just it really is, you know, there's that thing, follow your bliss.
Yes.
And you know what the world genuinely needs people to like express themselves authentically. I really did a bunch of thinking about this recently. This might be like a good closer, but it's just sometimes I kind of remember to like close my streams with it. But this is like my belief system is I believe that civilization, like human civilization, is moved forward with culture. And I believe that every single person in the world should participate in culture. And I believe that if you're interested in music, you need to understand how important it is to basically just share your voice with the world and just be yourself. And there's an entire world of people that want to hear what you're saying. There's an entire capacity to like connect with people all over the world who are on your wavelength. And for me, it's like my kind of purpose in life in a way is to really help people get their voices out into the world. And that has historically been like in the studio one-on-one, but now like the start I'm starting to venture into on the internet is because I can't be in the studio one-on-one with like many people in a year. So I'm really moving now into actively trying to teach and trying to like share what I've learned. But fundamentally, our world will get better if you make songs.
Yes. It's like,
do you know what I mean?
It's like culture portrays civilization. It's like tribes. It's like what you create is a tribe, not like you're just like a nobody. You're creating a tribe of your own, and you're bringing people into your tribe. And each tribe stands for different things, and what your tribe stands for what you believe in, what you feel is right. And of course, tribes can grow and it can improve and it can, get better. in ways
Yeah.
of functioning, and tribes can collaborate with another tribe sometimes.
Yeah.
But in
Absolutely.
essence, you're creating a world of your own, and you're bringing
Yeah.
people in to join in on the fun.
Yeah, yeah. And just, when I was a young man once, and when you see like some of the terrible things that young men do, it's like, well, imagine if that person just like really loved chords. You know what I mean? And instead of being bitter with the world, they were in their bedroom like going, that
Screaming.
sounds
Yeah.
amazing. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like the act of creation, as well as like, there's that whole thing about like our universe is hurtling inevitably towards its own heat, death, and billions of years through the process of entropy. And, entropy is just the process of things gradually going from order to disorder. So creativity is like the counterbalancing force to entropy. So, if we haven't talked a lot about politics, but if you look at what's going on in the world around us, it's very easy to, feel pretty down. But it's like, I think for every single person to feel empowered, like you actually creating something is making the world a better place.
For sure. And a more vibrant
like
and
voting.
exciting. It's like, it's just
Yeah,
making it
exactly.
more.
Yeah. So it's like casting that vote. So that comes back to like, if you're a starting bedroom producer, like go easy on yourself, but also like empower yourself and like understand that this is your own contribution to the world. The world needs culture. The world needs people to create things. And also you never really know where it's going to lead. You know?
For sure.
And there's so many different paths you can take.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah.
That was fun.
Yay.
Damian, thank you so much for coming today. I always love to have you back as well.
Oh, anytime.
I
Feel like you've got my email, right? So feel free to
Yes.
hit me up anytime if you just have like any questions, any nerdy questions.
Yeah.
If you're just like, why isn't this plugin working? Just hit me up.
I will. If you have any, I'd love to direct anybody who's interested to your to whatever platforms that you're in, Twitch
actually,
or.
You know what's so funny is I have tomorrow and some time over the weekend booked to do like my first YouTube videos as well.
Awesome.
But basically, I almost feel like I need to ask you a whole bunch of advice on that side.
Oh no,
But
I'm not the
basically,
right person to ask for any advice.
But basically, I'm here as Damian on everything.
Right,
right. I'm mostly active at the moment on Instagram and on Twitch.
Yeah.
I stream on Twitch 3 times a week, so Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings my time. And I stream very early Californian time, which tends to be like evening in Asia, kind of afternoons in Europe. And DamianTaylor.com is my website, so that's kind of like the central place. It's a really basic website at the moment, but that's kind of I'm in the process of just rebuilding that and expanding them out. So DamianTaylor.com is the simplest place that has links to everything, and there's a link to a newsletter as well, email newsletter, where I'll just be like sharing ideas. But sincerely, like if people are really interested in kind of learning music production or kind of taking a step forward in music. Then I'm in the process as well of building out specific courses, but I'm also looking at doing like some small kind of like online workshops where it's like, a small group of people and we're having a real-time conversation like this. You're talking before about how when you're just seeing chat boxes, you still feel the connection, but it's a whole different thing to be able to talk to people in real time. So I'm figuring out how all that's going to look at the moment.
Yeah, face to face,
But this is really like the point in my life where I feel like I'm really just enjoying the process of kind of sharing and, trying to, in a way, like producing producers, not just producing artists.
Nice.
Do you know what I mean? So, yeah. Anyway, so DamianTaylor.com, and here's Damian.
Please send me, I'll put the links in the description for everybody to.
Okay, that'd be great.
But That's
the one thing I need to learn is link in the description below.
I've only just started to figure this out recently, but.
Right.
People appreciate it. I'm sure I'm sure people will appreciate it. But
Awesome.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for talking to me, Damian.
It's a joy. It's great to speak to you. It's been amazing even just seeing, just seeing how much things have evolved with you, and that since Colin told me to like check out your stuff, so I'm really excited to see where things go for you and where you go next.
Thank you. Keep in touch.
Right.
Keep in touch.
I will do. Yeah, likewise. 100% like hit me up anytime.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to stop recording now.
All right, me too.